I thought my husband died in war 40 years ago, until I saw his face on a charity poster downtown. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. They say time heals all wounds. I have lived long enough to know that this is not entirely true. Time does not heal. It teaches you to carry the weight differently, to breathe around the ache, to wake each morning and continue despite the emptiness that sits beside you at breakfast. My name is Eleanor, and for 40 years I believed myself a widow. For 40 years I have lived with the ghost of a man I loved more than my own life. His name was Thomas Whitmore, and until 3 weeks ago I was certain he had been dead since 1985. Let me tell you how we met. It was the summer of 1982. I was 22 years old, fresh out of secretarial school, working at a small law firm downtown. I wore my hair long then, down to my waist, and I had this yellow dress I loved, with tiny white flowers embroidered along the hem. I remember the dress because I was wearing it the day Thomas walked into my life. He came into the office to file some paperwork for his father's estate. I was at the front desk, typing up correspondence, and when the door opened, I looked up and saw him standing there in the afternoon light. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that fell across his forehead, but it was his eyes that caught me. Brown, warm, with little lines at the corners that suggested he smiled often. He smiled at me that day. A real smile, not the polite stranger smile most people give. And I smiled back, feeling something flutter in my chest that I had never felt before. We talked while I helped him with the forms. He told me about his father, a veteran who had passed away that spring. He spoke with such tenderness about the old man, about the stories he used to tell, the way he could fix anything with his hands. Thomas had those same hands, I would learn. Strong, capable, gentle. Before he left, he asked if I would have coffee with him sometime. I said yes without hesitation. My mother would have called me forward. I called it fate. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks through the park near my apartment. Within weeks, we were inseparable. Thomas worked construction during the day, hard physical labor that left him tired, but never too tired to see me. He would show up at my door after his shift, still dusty from the work site, and we would sit on my tiny balcony and talk until the stars came out. He told me his dreams. He wanted to build houses, real homes for families. He wanted land somewhere quiet, maybe near the mountains, where we could have a garden and dogs and children running through the yard. I told him my dreams too. I wanted to write, to fill notebooks with stories, to maybe teach someday. We would weave our dreams together, creating a future that felt so real I could almost touch it. 6 months after we met, he proposed. It was winter by then, December, and he took me to the park where we had walked that first evening. The trees were bare, and our breath made clouds in the cold air. He got down on one knee, right there on the frozen path, and pulled out a simple gold ring. I love you, Eleanor. I want to spend every day of my life making you happy. Will you marry me? I said yes through tears. We held each other in the cold, and I remember thinking that I had never been so warm. We married in the spring of 1983. It was a small wedding, just our families and close friends, in the church where my parents had been married. I wore my mother's dress, altered to fit me, and Thomas wore a suit he had bought specially for the occasion. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Thomas kissed me like we were the only two people in the world. We had 2 beautiful years together. We rented a small apartment on the east side of town, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Thomas would come home from work and find me at the kitchen table, writing in my notebooks, and he would kiss the top of my head and ask what adventures I was creating that day. I learned to cook his favorite meals, He learned to tolerate my terrible singing in the shower. We talked about starting a family. We picked out names. Sarah for a girl, after his mother. Daniel for a boy, after my father. We saved money in a coffee tin on top of the refrigerator, planning for the house we would buy someday, the life we would build. And then, in the winter of 1984, everything changed. The war had been going on for some time, but it felt distant, something that happened in other places to other people. Until the draft notice came. I found it in the mailbox on a Thursday afternoon in January. My hands shook as I read it. Thomas was being called up. He had 30 days to report. I remember the sound I made when I realized what it meant. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob. Something animal and desperate. I stood there in the hallway of our building, holding that piece of paper, and I felt the future we had built together begin to crumble. Thomas tried to be strong for me. He held me that night while I cried, stroking my hair, promising me it would be all right. He said he would serve his time and come home. He said we would have our house, our children, our life. He said this was just a delay, not an ending. We had 30 days. We made every moment count. We took photographs. We went to our favorite restaurant and ordered too much food and laughed, even though neither of us felt like laughing. We made love slowly, savoring every touch, every kiss, trying to memorize each other. The night before he left, we lay in bed together, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. He gave me a letter. He said not to read it until he was gone, that he had written down everything he wanted me to know, everything he felt, in case he could not find the words in the morning. I still have that letter. It sits in a box beside my bed, the paper worn soft from being unfolded and refolded 1,000 times. I know every word by heart. The morning he left, we stood on the platform at the train station. He was in his uniform, a duffel bag over his shoulder, surrounded by other young men in the same green clothes, the same uncertain expressions. Families clustered around them, mothers crying, girlfriends clinging, children confused by the gravity of the adults. Thomas held my face in his hands. "I will come back to you, Eleanor. I promise. Wait for me." "I promise," I whispered. "I will wait forever if I have to." He kissed me one last time. Then he boarded the train, and I watched through the window as he found a seat. He pressed his hand against the glass. I pressed mine against it from the outside, wishing I could reach through and pull him back. The train pulled away. I stood there long after it disappeared, my hand still raised, as if I could hold on to him through sheer force of will. For the first few months, letters came regularly. He wrote about the training, the other soldiers, the boredom and the fear. He wrote about missing me, about counting the days until he could hold me again. I wrote back every day, filling pages with news from home, with love, with hope. Then the letters began to slow. The war intensified. Weeks would pass between correspondences. When they did come, they were shorter, more guarded. I could read the exhaustion in his handwriting, the way the letters slanted differently, pressed harder into the paper. The last letter I received was dated August 15th, 1985. It was brief. He said he loved me. He said he thought of me every morning when he woke and every night before he slept. He said to keep writing, that my letters were the only thing keeping him sane. I wrote back immediately, but my letter was returned weeks later, marked as undeliverable. And then, in September, 2 officers came to my door. I knew before they spoke. I knew from the way they stood, from the expressions on their faces, from the way one of them held his hat in both hands. I knew, and yet I opened the door and let them in and listened as they told me that my husband, Private Thomas Whitmore, had been killed in action on September 3rd, 1985. They said he had been brave. They said he had saved others. They said his body had been recovered and would be returned for burial. They said all the things they were supposed to say. And I heard none of it. I heard only the roaring in my ears, the sound of my world ending. I do not remember much of the funeral. I remember the flag on the coffin. I remember my mother holding me upright because my legs would not work. I remember the sound of the rifle salute, how each shot made me flinch, made me die a little more. They buried him in the Veterans Cemetery on the hill outside town. I had his name engraved on the stone. Thomas James Whitmore, beloved husband, 1960, 1985. Beneath it, I added the words he had said to me on the train platform. I will come back to you. But he had not come back. He never would. The years that followed are a blur. I moved through them like a ghost myself. I left our apartment because I could not bear to be there without him. I moved in with my mother for a while, then eventually found a small studio across town. I kept working at the law firm. I kept breathing, kept waking up, kept going through the motions of living. People told me I was young. They said I would love again, that I should not give up on happiness. Well-meaning friends tried to set me up on dates. My mother gently suggested that Thomas would want me to move on, to find someone new. But how do you move on from the love of your life? How do you look at another man when you still see your husband's face every time you close your eyes? How do you say vows to someone else when the promises you made still feel sacred, still feel binding? I could not do it. I tried. Once, a man from the firm asked me to dinner in 1987, 2 years after Thomas died. He was kind, patient, understanding about my grief. We went out several times. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. But when he kissed me goodnight after our 4th dinner, I felt nothing. Nothing but guilt and the overwhelming wrongness of being touched by hands that were not Thomas's. I apologized and told him I could not see him again. He was gracious about it, but I saw the pity in his eyes, and I hated it. After that, I stopped trying. I built a life around the absence of the one I loved. I threw myself into work, eventually becoming a paralegal. I took up painting, discovering that I could express in colors what I could not say in words. I volunteered at the library, teaching children to read, finding purpose in their joy. I made friends, maintained relationships with my family. I was not unhappy exactly. I learned to appreciate small pleasures, morning coffee, good books, the changing seasons. I traveled a little, took trips to places Thomas and I had talked about visiting together. I scattered his memory across the world like seeds. But at night, in the quiet of my small apartment, I was lonely, profoundly, bone-deep lonely. I kept his photograph on my nightstand. I still wore my wedding ring. On our anniversary each year, I would buy flowers and take them to his grave, sit there in the grass and talk to the stone, telling him about my year, about the world he was missing. Time passed. 1 year became 5, became 10, became 20. My mother passed away. I retired from the firm. My hair went gray, then white. Lines appeared on my face. My body slowed, ached in new ways. I moved into a small house with a garden, filled it with plants and books and paintings. I learned to be alone. I learned to find peace in solitude. But I never stopped missing him, not for a single day. Every year on September 3rd, the anniversary of his death, I would light a candle and sit with my grief, letting it wash over me like a wave. I would read his letters again, trace the words with my fingers, hear his voice in the sentences. I thought I knew how my story ended. I thought I would live out my remaining years with his memory, and when I died, I would be buried beside him, finally reunited in whatever comes after this life. I thought I knew. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning in October, I learned that everything I believed was wrong. It was an ordinary day. I woke at my usual time, had my coffee on the back porch while watching the birds at the feeder. I had errands to run, groceries to buy, a prescription to pick up from the pharmacy downtown. I dressed in comfortable clothes, took my canvas shopping bags, and walked the 6 blocks to the main street. It was a beautiful day, unseasonably warm, the kind of autumn afternoon that feels like a gift. The trees were just beginning to turn, touches of gold and red among the green. People were out, enjoying the weather, sitting at the outdoor cafes, walking their dogs. I was heading to the pharmacy when I noticed the poster. It was in a storefront window between the pharmacy and a coffee shop. A large poster, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, with the logo of a local charity organization at the top. The headline read, "Help us support our forgotten veterans." Below the headline were several photographs of elderly men, veterans living in care facilities, men who had served their country and now needed assistance. The organization was raising money to provide them with better care, recreational activities, assistance with medical needs. I had seen posters like this before. I usually stopped to read them, to donate when I could. The veterans of my husband's generation, of all generations, deserved support. So I stepped closer to read the details. And then I saw his face. Third photograph from the left. An old man, maybe in his 70s, sitting in a wheelchair in what looked like a common room of a care facility. He was thin, his hair white and sparse, his face weathered by age and time. But it was him. I know it was him. The scar. He had the same scar, a thin line through his left eyebrow, from a childhood accident with a swing set. He had told me the story on one of our early dates, laughing about how clumsy he had been as a child. The scar was there, on this old man's face, in this photograph, and his eyes. Even aged, even tired-looking, they were the same. That same warmth, that same shape. Thomas's eyes. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the poster. People moved around me, annoyed that I was blocking the flow of foot traffic. Someone bumped into me, muttered an apology. I did not respond. I could not move, could not breathe, could not process what I was seeing. It could not be him. It was impossible. Thomas died 40 years ago. I went to his funeral. His name is on a gravestone. The army told me he was dead. But that was his face. That was his scar. Those were his eyes. I do not know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe longer. Eventually, my brain began to function again. I fumbled in my purse for my phone, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I took a photograph of the poster, zooming in on his picture, on the caption beneath it. James Morrison, 76. Army veteran, resident of Meadowbrook Care Center. James Morrison. Not Thomas Whitmore. But the face was Thomas's. I would know that face anywhere. I had memorized every line of it in the 2 years we had together. I had studied his photographs for 40 years. I knew the shape of his jaw, the set of his mouth, the way one ear stuck out just slightly more than the other. This James Morrison was Thomas. I do not remember walking home. One moment I was standing in front of the poster. The next I was sitting on my couch, still clutching my phone, the photographs I had taken glowing on the screen. I was shaking. My whole body was shaking. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the world had tilted and I could not find my balance. It could not be him. But what if it was? For the first time in 40 years, I let myself feel hope. And hope was terrifying. I looked at the poster on my phone, read the information again. The charity organization was called Veterans Care Alliance. They had a phone number, an email address, a website. I navigated to the website with trembling fingers. The site had information about their mission, their programs, the facilities they supported. There was a page featuring the veterans they helped, including the photographs from the poster. I found James Morrison's picture again, clicked to enlarge it. The caption said he had served in the Army in the 1980s, had been injured in combat, and had lived in various care facilities for the past 30 years due to physical and cognitive challenges resulting from his injuries. Physical and cognitive challenges. What did that mean? Brain injury? Memory loss? Could it be possible? Could Thomas have survived but been so injured that he could not remember who he was? Could records have been mixed up? Identities confused in the chaos of war? Or was I seeing what I wanted to see? Was I so desperate for him to be alive that I was inventing connections that did not exist? I spent the rest of that day and all of the next staring at the photograph, comparing it to the pictures I had of Thomas. I dug out our wedding album, the photographs from our time together, the ones I had kept in a box for 40 years, because it hurt too much to display them. Young Thomas and old James, 40 years apart. But the bone structure was the same. The scar was the same. The more I looked, the more convinced I became. On the third day, I called the number for Veterans Care Alliance. A young woman answered, cheerful and professional. She introduced herself as Sarah, a volunteer coordinator. I explained, haltingly, that I had seen the poster, that one of the veterans pictured looked familiar, that I wanted to know more about him. Which veteran? She asked kindly. James Morrison, I said. The man in the wheelchair. Can you tell me anything about him? There was a pause. Then Sarah said that due to privacy regulations, she could not share personal information about the residents. But if I wanted to visit, to perhaps volunteer at the facility, that could be arranged. Family members and friends were always welcome to visit residents, she added. I am not family, I said, but I think I might know him. From a long time ago. Another pause. Then Sarah said she would put me in touch with the director of Meadowbrook Care Center, where James Morrison lived. She took my name and number and promised someone would call me back. I waited. For 3 days, I waited by the phone, jumping every time it rang. I could not sleep. I could barely eat. I kept looking at the photograph, searching for proof that I was right, or proof that I was losing my mind. Finally, on Saturday morning, my phone rang. A man introduced himself as David Chen, director of Meadowbrook Care Center. Sarah had told him about my call, and he wanted to understand what my connection was to James Morrison. I tried to explain. I told him about Thomas, about the war, about being told he was dead. I told him about the poster, about the scar, about the eyes. I said I knew it sounded crazy, but I had to know. I had to see him. Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said gently that James Morrison had been a resident at Meadowbrook for almost 15 years. Before that, he had been in other facilities. He had been found in 1990, living on the streets, with no identification, no memory of who he was or where he came from. He had significant injuries, both physical and neurological, consistent with combat trauma. He had been given the name James Morrison by the social workers who helped him, Morrison after the street where he had been found. For the past 35 years, no one had claimed him. No one had come forward to say they knew him. Until now. Mr. Chen said he could not promise that James was my Thomas, but if I wanted to visit, he would arrange it. He warned me that James's memory was damaged, that he might not recognize me, might not remember his past. He said I should prepare myself for the possibility that this was not the reunion I was hoping for. I told him I understood. I told him I had to try. We arranged for me to visit the following Tuesday afternoon. The days between that call and Tuesday were the longest of my life. Longer even than those terrible days after Thomas left for war. Longer than the days after I learned he had died. Because now there was hope, fragile and terrifying, and I did not know if I could survive having it crushed. I told no one, not my neighbors, not my few remaining friends. This was too delicate, too impossible to explain. I kept it inside, held it close, protected it like a flame that might blow out if I breathed wrong. Tuesday arrived. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep. I showered, dressed in clothes that felt appropriate, not too formal, not too casual. I put on my wedding ring, which I still wore, but usually turned inward so the band showed, and the small diamond did not. Today, I turned it outward. I gathered photographs. Our wedding photo, a picture of us on a picnic, laughing at something outside the frame. His army portrait, taken right after he enlisted, looking so young and serious in his uniform. I put them in an envelope and slipped the envelope into my purse. Meadowbrook Care Center was on the north side of town, a 20-minute drive. It was a pleasant building, brick and well-maintained, with gardens out front and a parking lot that suggested frequent visitors. I sat in my car for several minutes after I arrived, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. What if it was him? What if it was not? I did not know which possibility terrified me more. Finally, I got out of the car and walked to the entrance. The lobby was bright and clean, with comfortable furniture and artwork on the walls. A receptionist greeted me with a smile, and when I gave my name, she said Mr. Chen was expecting me. David Chen turned out to be a kind-faced man in his 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He shook my hand warmly and led me to his office, offering me water and a seat. He explained again about James, about the circumstances under which he had come to be at Meadowbrook. He showed me the file, though there was not much in it. No birth certificate, no military records under that name. The doctors had documented his injuries, extensive scarring from burns and shrapnel, old broken bones that had healed poorly, and significant brain trauma that affected his memory and cognitive function. "Has he ever remembered anything?" I asked. "Any flashes of his past?" "Sometimes he has dreams," Mr. Chen said. "He talks about a woman, a house, trees, but he cannot hold on to the memories. They slip away from him." My eyes filled with tears. Thomas had promised me a house, trees, a life together. Could those dreams be echoes of what we had planned? "Would you like to meet him?" Mr. Chen asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He led me through the facility, down halls decorated with paintings and photographs, past common rooms where other residents sat watching television or playing cards. Everything was clean, well lit, carefully maintained. Thomas, if this was Thomas, was being cared for. We stopped outside a room near the end of a hallway. The door was open. Inside, I could see a hospital bed, a chair by the window, personal items on a shelf. And in the chair, facing the window, sat an old man. "That is James," Mr. Chen said softly. "Would you like me to come in with you?" I shook my head. I needed to do this alone. I stepped into the room. The old man did not turn around. He was looking out the window at the garden below, where autumn flowers bloomed in neat beds. I moved closer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "James?" I said softly. He turned his head, and I saw his face fully for the first time in 40 years. It was him, older, so much older, worn down by time and pain and whatever he had endured. But it was Thomas. My Thomas. The scar through his eyebrow, the shape of his nose, the curve of his mouth, his eyes, faded but still warm, still kind. I made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. My legs gave out, and I sank into the chair beside his, tears streaming down my face. "Thomas," I whispered. "Thomas, it is me. It is Eleanor." He looked at me with confusion. "Hello," he said slowly. His voice was rough, deeper than I remembered, but the cadence was the same. "Do I know you?" "Yes," I said, reaching for his hand. The skin was thin, spotted with age, but the bones underneath were his bones. The hand I had held 1,000 times. "You know me. I am your wife. I am Eleanor." He stared at our joined hands, then back at my face. I could see him searching, trying to find something in the depths of his damaged memory. "Eleanor," he repeated. The name seemed to cause him pain, a headache forming behind his eyes. I pulled out the envelope, took out the photographs with shaking hands. "Look," I said, "this is us. Our wedding day. Do you remember?" I held up the photograph of us in front of the church, young and radiant, his arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder. He took the photo carefully, studied it. For a long moment he was silent. Then a single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "I dream about her," he whispered. "The woman in white. She is always just out of reach." "That is me," I said, my voice breaking. "I have been out of reach for 40 years, but I am here now. I am right here." He looked up at me, and for just a moment, I saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Just a moment, a brief connection, and then it faded. "I am sorry," he said. "I do not remember. I want to remember, but I cannot hold on to it." "It is all right," I said. though my heart was breaking all over again. It is all right. I remember enough for both of us. I spent 2 hours with him that afternoon. I told him our story, starting from the beginning. How we met, how we fell in love, how we married. I told him about our apartment, about our dreams, about the day he left for war. I showed him the other photographs, pointed out details, trying to spark something in his mind. Sometimes he seemed to listen intently, nodding, as if the story resonated with something deep inside him. Other times he would drift away, lost in his own thoughts, confused about where he was or why I was there. But when I stood to leave, when I said I would come back soon, he reached for my hand and held it. "Will you?" he asked. "Will you come back?" "Every day if they let me," I promised. And I have kept that promise. For 3 weeks now, I have driven to Meadowbrook every afternoon. I sit with him, talk to him, read to him. I bring more photographs, more stories from our past. I tell him about the life I lived after he disappeared, about how I never stopped loving him. Some days are better than others. Some days he seems to know me, to recognize something familiar in my voice or my face. Other days he calls me by other names, or thinks I am a nurse, or cannot remember that I was there the day before. But he is always glad to see me. He smiles when I arrive, reaches for my hand, seems calmer when I am there. The staff tells me he talks about me when I am gone. He says he has a visitor, someone important, though he cannot always remember my name. He sleeps better now, has fewer nightmares. I have spoken with the doctors. They have reviewed what little records exist, tried to piece together what might have happened. They believe that Thomas was indeed injured in combat, severely enough that he was presumed dead. Perhaps in the chaos of the war, bodies and identities were confused. Perhaps he was left behind, found by locals, moved through various hospitals and displacement camps, before eventually ending up on the streets, his memory gone, his identity lost. Somehow, against all odds, he survived. But the man who survived was not the man who left. Thomas Whitmore died in that war, in a way. James Morrison, whoever he became in those lost years, is who remains. I have contacted the Army, trying to correct the records, to reclaim his true identity. It is a slow process, tangled in bureaucracy and lost paperwork, but I am persistent. Thomas deserves to have his name back. In the meantime, I sit with him. I hold his hand. I tell him I love him, over and over, hoping that somewhere in the damaged corridors of his mind, he hears me and knows it is true. I do not know how much time we have. He is not in good health. The years of hardship and poor care before Meadowbrook took their toll. But however many days we have left, I will be there. I will keep the promise I made on that train platform 40 years ago. I will wait for him, even if he never fully remembers me, even if all I can give him is my presence and my love in these final chapters of his life. It is enough. It has to be enough. People ask me how I feel now that I have found him. They expect me to say I am happy, that this is a miracle, an answered prayer. But the truth is more complicated than that. I am grateful beyond words that he is alive, that I can see him and touch him and know he is real. I am relieved that he has been cared for, that he is safe and comfortable now. But I am also heartbroken, because the man I loved, the man who promised to come back to me, did not come back. Not really. He is gone, replaced by someone who wears his face, but cannot remember our love, our life, our promises to each other. I have spent 40 years mourning him, and now I find I must mourn him again, in a different way. I must mourn what we lost, what we will never have back, even as I cherish what little we have now. Some nights I lie awake and think about all the years we missed, the house we never built, the children we never had, the life we planned that never came to pass. I think about him lost and alone, unable to remember who he was, unable to find his way home. And I think about myself, living half a life, loving a ghost, when the real man was out there somewhere, unreachable. The waste of it crushes me. The tragedy of it is almost too much to bear. But then, I remember. I found him. Against impossible odds, through a chance glance at a poster on a Tuesday morning, I found him. For 40 years I thought he was dead, and he was not. He was alive. He is alive. And as long as he is alive, as long as I can sit beside him and hold his hand and tell him I love him, there is something worth holding on to. Some thread of our story that continues, however frayed. Yesterday, I sat with him as the sun set outside his window, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He was tired, drifting in and out of sleep. I held his hand and hummed softly, a song we used to dance to in our little apartment a lifetime ago. His eyes opened and he looked at me. Really looked at me. And he smiled. "I know you," he said. "I do not remember how, but I know you." "You do," I whispered. "You know me. And I know you. You are important," he said. "You matter." "You matter too," I told him. "You matter so much." He squeezed my hand weakly. "I am glad you are here. I am glad I am here too." He closed his eyes again, and within moments he was asleep. I stayed beside him, watching him breathe, marveling at the miracle of his existence, mourning the tragedy of all we had lost. This is my life now, this strange, painful, precious gift. I found my husband 40 years after I thought I lost him, and he is both everything I remembered and nothing like I dreamed. The man and the ghost, occupying the same space. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if he will ever truly remember me, remember us. I do not know if we have weeks or months or even years left together. But I know this. I am his wife. I have always been his wife. And I will be beside him until the end, whenever and however that end comes. They buried someone else in that grave on the hill outside town. Someday, when the time comes, I will bury Thomas for real. And this time, I will know the truth. This time, there will be no questions, no 40 years of wondering. And when my own time comes, whenever that may be, I will be buried beside him. Finally, truly, together. For now, I wake each morning and drive to Meadowbrook. I sit beside James, who is Thomas, who is something in between. I hold his hand and tell him stories and love him the best way I know how. It is not the life we planned. It is not the happy ending I dreamed of in those early days when we were young and everything seemed possible. But it is the ending we have. And I have learned, over these long years, to be grateful for what I am given. I thought my husband died in war 40 years ago. I was wrong. He survived. And somehow, impossibly, so did our love. And that will have to be enough.